Hello, this is Jorge Herrera, and we are continuing with the reading of the book Building Your Warehouse of Wealth, written by Nelson Nash. And in this chapter, Nelson is actually making a turn and using the Bible to illustrate to us how difficult it is for we humans to learn. So he's using Bible studies to um, to help us understand that even when we are presented with very um, big experiences, we normally don't learn much out of them. So, chapter 12. Well, on chapter 9, 10, and 11, Nelson presented concepts that make this book very controversial and makes for very good discussions. So, if any of you want to make any notations, any comments about chapter 9, 10, and 11, universal life, variable life, and equity index, universal life, annuities, and precious metals. So you're welcome to put your comment and we can have a conversation. So let's go with chapter 12. Out of Egypt and onto Babylon, from slavery back to slavery. History seems to prove that mankind refuses to learn very much from extremely valuable experiences. I can think of no better place to prove my point than looking at the Bible. Mankind has an eternal problem. We want to be God, in the pagan sense of the word. To witness the ultimate manifestation of this malady, watch what we try to do with our government. Let's begin by going back several thousand years in the book of Genesis and start with God's contract with Jacob. That's what means it's Israel. I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are laying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offsprings. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. And that is Genesis 28, 13 to 15. Jacob had a twin brother, Esau. In that day in time, the firstborn received, I guess it's Esau, yeah. In that day in time, the firstborn received the birthright from the father. Esau was the older one. Jacob and his mother Rebekah, through some trickery, managed to secure the birthright of the firstborn from his father Isaac. From his father Isaac. Jacob was the favorite son of Rebekah. Esau was the favorite of Isaac. Naturally, this embittered Esau towards his brother Jacob. Rebekah tells Jacob, your brother Esau is consoling himself with the thought of killing you. Now then, my son, do what I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran. That's Genesis 27, 42b to 43. And so Jacob went to work for his uncle Laban, who turned out to be a bigger trickster than Jacob and his mother. Laban had two daughters, Leah and Rachel. Jacob told Laban he would work for him for 7 years in exchange for his daughter Rachel. Laban tricked him by giving him his oldest daughter, Leah. Then he said, Work for me 7 more years, and I will give you Rachel. Laban really knew how to create a good deal for himself. But don't feel worried for Jacob. He found a way to get even with Laban a few years later. Go and search it out for yourself. See Genesis 30, 25 to 43. Apparently, Jacob learned very well from Laban the art of deception. Jacob had 4 sons by Leah, by her maidservant, and by Rachel's maidservant, for a total of 10 sons. Wow. He finally gets to marry Rachel, and she produces 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. They are Jacob's favorites, naturally creating all the makings of a dysfunctional family. Joseph could easily be classified by his 10 older brothers as a spoiler brat. Joseph was also a dreamer, and this characteristic comes in handy later in his life. Somewhere along the timeline, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. A situation presents itself that the 10 brothers can get Joseph out of their lives, and nothing could be better by selling him to a caravan of tradesmen on their way to Egypt. So Joseph is sold into slavery. There, Joseph is sold into slavery. Another sequence of events places him in prison. We won't go into the details of this event on this event. Again, search this one out for yourself too. It is interesting reading Genesis 39. Joseph was a model prisoner and worked himself up to becoming a trustee. Here we enter the concept of government. Pharaoh was government. Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and his chief baker were thrown into prison as a result of offending the king and were assigned to Joseph for custody. Both the cupbearer and the baker had a dream, and Joseph correctly interprets them. The cupbearer will be restored to his position in 3 days. Joseph instructs him, but when all goes well with you, remember me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison, for I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. The king's baker didn't fare too well. Interpreting his dream, Joseph said, within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat away your flesh. And so it came to be. Wow. Unfortunately, the chief could better, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Imagine that. 2 years later, Pharaoh has a dream, but none of his servants can interpret it. Finally, his cupbearer remembers the abilities of Joseph and recommends him to Pharaoh, just only 2 years later. Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream. 7 years of your abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. Genesis 41, 21 to 30. Because of this unique ability, Joseph becomes second in command in all of Egypt, a rather rapid rise to power from such a lowly state of being a prisoner. During the 7 years of plenty, Pharaoh confiscated 20% of all the produce of the land. There is no evidence that he paid for it. During the 7 years of famine, he sold back to them that which he had stolen. So much for a government program. We tend today to think this kind of chicanery is a modern phenomenon, but you see, it has deep roots going back thousands of years. The famine was widespread, and Israel back in Canaan learned that there was grain in Egypt, So he sent his 10 eldest sons to buy grain. This resulted in a face off with Joseph, the one they had sold into slavery. Of course, they didn't recognize him. They thought he was probably a slave somewhere, or maybe even dead. Joseph put them through a rather tough inquisition, but eventually reconciliation was achieved. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Tell your brothers to do this. Load your animals and return to the land of Canaan, and bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt." Italics added. And you can, I'm like Biden here, and you can, and you can enjoy the fat of the land. Genesis 45:16 to 18. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of all Egypt will be yours. Genesis 45:20. To my knowledge, this was among the first records of a government handout. As a student of Austrian economics, it is evident to me that if you ever start taking that sort of stuff, you will end up being a slave. It does something to one's mind and makes one dependent on the grantor. There is a very strong element of dependency in the act of worship. You will end up worshiping that on which you are dependent. And that's what government people want to do, be dependent on them. They want to be objects of worship. They want you to think that your blessings in life come from them, not from God. This is job security for government officials. My personal observation down through the years has been whenever there is a government handout of any kind, normally intelligent people will abandon their productive efforts, go stand in line for the share of the dole, and watch each other starve to death. This point is the central theme of this chapter, and it will be re-emphasized as the story progresses. And now comes the hard part. The famine was severe throughout the whole region. Joseph collected all the money that was to be found in Egypt and Canaan in payment for the grain they were buying, and he brought it to Pharaoh's palace. Genesis 47:14. Eventually, they ran out of money. Then they mortgaged their cattle. When they ran out of cattle, they mortgaged themselves. They became slaves for 430 years. In that many years, you can really become good at slavery. You can think past that. You can't think past that situation. And as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Proverbs 23:7. After a lengthy time, Joseph dies, and then a new king who did not know about Joseph came to power in Egypt. Exodus 1:8. Things got much worse for the Israelite nation. Nothing in all the scriptures indicates that God intended for his chosen people to end up in Egypt as slaves forever. To me, it seemed that he let this experience happen to teach them that they should be dependent on him, not government of any kind. Don't ever sell your souls to government, or you will end up in slavery. This is a lesson that they needed to learn early in their existence as a nation. And then in the next chapter, or the next part two, we continue with Moses. So, as you see, Nelson was um, a big follower of the Bible, and he read it from one end to the other, and he lived by it. So, I respect the Bible, and I think it's a great book to learn from. So, I have read some parts and tried to take in the knowledge out of it. So about infinite banking, if you have any question, please put it under the chapters, under the videos that you are watching, or contact me at jorgeeherrera.com that takes you to my LinkedIn page, and we can have a conversation. And I can also help you create your policy because I started learning about infinite banking in 2005 and I continue learning so I can share my knowledge with you. See you next time.